It's a particular pleasure today to have Fred Hochberg with us, the head of the Ex-Im Bank. Exports have assumed a critical role in our economic recovery, and indeed the President has set up a goal of doubling U.S. exports. But it's particularly critical because after a financial crisis, consumer demand and investment growth both come back more slowly than after recessions that are not caused by financial meltdowns. If we can't, and we have seen, or we have not seen, the kind of strong bounce back in either consumer spending or investment spending that is characteristic of a deep recession. There's no V operating, and that again is characteristic of downturns triggered by financial crises. Well, if we can't depend on U.S. consumers to drive a strong recovery, and we can't depend on business investment yet to drive a strong recovery, and our stimulus has more or less run its course, that leaves foreign demand, which is to say exports. This is a particular challenge now because our largest trading partner, the European Union, is facing its own problems. Even so, after a decline of $270 billion in exports from 2008 to 2009, the latest numbers tell us that that downward trend has stopped, that exports have stabilized. We should see exports this year that are at least as strong as they were last year. I think that's right. That's what my economics says, but I'm very interested to know what if Fred agrees. And I can think of no one better to assist the President in what really is now a central part of the Democratic Economic Recovery Program than Fred Hochberg. He comes with a very distinguished career in business as well as government. He served as the President and COO of Lilly & Vernon Corporation, which years ago was a small family catalog operation, and Fred took it to a significant publicly traded corporation. He's been Dean of the New School for Management and Urban Policy. I knew him in the Clinton administration, where he was the Deputy Administrator and then Acting Administrator of the Small Business Administration. He is also a long-term personal friend of mine, so I'm especially delighted to have him here today. Fred Hochberg.
Thank you. Rob, thank you. I first met Rob through some mutual friends, actually, and they said, you have to meet Robbie Shapiro at that time. So that was, they obviously date from a different era in your life.
Different era.
Those who know me, when I was in second grade, I was still Freddie Hochberg, and at some point, probably in the fourth grade, it became Fred. So let me thank you for coming today, and I have two colleagues here, Bill Marstell, who's in our economics department, and Eric Kleiman, our communication shop, so I just want to acknowledge them as well. Let me start with a story. Recently, Brookings held a seminar at the White House, or a program, looking at the automobile industry and auto communities, and we had one of our new senior vice presidents of small business, Charles Tansey, actually someone I worked with at the SBA, went to this seminar, and we wanted to see how we could help automakers, and actually a lot of cars in the United States are actually exported, some to Canada, some to Mexico, and some further abroad. And Charles was sitting at this table and talking with a number of officials from Michigan, and they told him about a company called Rapistan, which makes conveyor belts. And actually, my ears pricked up because when I ran my catalog company, we used Rapistan conveyors. They're kind of some of the sort of, that in Detroit terms, they're like the Cadillac of conveyor belts. They're not the Mercedes. They're a good, solid Cadillac, when Cadillac meant something. I guess it does again. So this Chinese company wanted to buy $250,000 worth of conveyor belts from Rapidstan, and but when it came to finance the deal, the local bank said, you know, we're not going to, this is a Chinese credit. How do we know we'll get paid? They declined. And the city then, the company approached the city, and the city did not know how to deal with this financial risk, and they declined. So what happened? $250,000 order, capital goods, helping our exports. Didn't happen. No order, no jobs, lost opportunity. And the city manager was very frustrated when he heard the story, and Charles Tansey sort of, when he relayed the story, expressed our frustration. I don't like to start it down, but the point is, this is exactly why the Export-Import Bank was created. It's exactly what we would do is to avoid that. One of the things we can do, and particularly on a transaction of that size, is we can guarantee the receivable. We can totally guarantee the receivable, and what we do is we take away the credit risk. We essentially eliminate the idea that there might be a credit risk if you sell to a foreign company. So what we do is we insure receivables, such as a case like this. If Rapidstan had sold this to China, we essentially sell an insurance policy to insure their receivables. So if in the event they're not paid, we make good on that. We also do, in addition to insuring receivables, we'll also sometimes we could lend money to the ultimate buyer. So if the company in China needed to buy this over 5 years, we can actually lend them the money to buy the goods, and therefore also essentially ensure that Rapidstan will get paid in full. So my job, and why I'm happy to be here today, is to just make sure there aren't any more stories like that as best I can. Or if when I hear about them, we find a way we get to them sooner than before they have a chance to we lose an order and lose a real opportunity. Because every time we lose an opportunity like that, it's one more place that a foreign company has sold into that market, and there's a certain, they begin to establish themselves, and an American company is not. Now, the bank goes back to 1934. I actually sit at a desk, so your tax dollars at work. This desk is 76 years old. It was, and there's a plaque on it from Jesse Jones. Jesse Jones is a man from Houston. Anyone here from Houston? You know Jesse Jones? He's a legend. So he helped FDR create the organization that led to the Export-Import Bank and, frankly, the Small Business Administration where I worked before, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. It was that sort of brainchild that formed Ex-Im Bank and also formed the SBA a few years later. We are one of the smallest federal agencies. We have fewer than 400 employees. I think we have one of the biggest jobs, and that is financing exports to help create 2 million additional new jobs based on the President's National Export Initiative. We support exports to 175 countries. I always check if I have it in my pocket. And we don't cost a dime. In fact, not even a penny. We are in totally self-funding. The fees we collect, we would collect, say, an insurance premium on that Rapidstan order. Those fees pay for my salary, Bill's salary, Eric's, and 397 other people. They pay for our rent. They pay for all of our loan losses. They pay for all those expenses. And on top of that, since 1992, we've actually returned $5 billion to the federal treasury, above and beyond all of our loan losses and all of our administrative costs. So we're a different kind of bank than we've been reading about for the last couple of years. And we also don't pay those kind of bonuses that those banks pay. And I think that the serving in this job and being in the administration, we've had a very busy agenda that President Obama has since he got into office. I mean, if we look back on less than 18 months, you know, we're wrestling with this oil spill in the Gulf, but we have had issues around Iran, or issues around North Korea, the financial crisis, putting people back to work. I mean, this is health care. This has been an exceedingly busy and a time that has sort of tested any administration to the full. But one of our number one priorities is creating jobs. And actually in 2010, we've seen improvement. In 6 of the last 7 months, we've actually added jobs from a period when, think about a year ago, we were losing something like 700,000, 600,000 jobs a month. But the president said very clearly, his work isn't done until everybody who wants a job can have one and has found the job that they found a job. Now, last week, Secretary Geithner was at the G20 summit in South Korea, and he was very blunt. And I was just with him 2 weeks before at the China Strategic and Economic Dialogue, and it was a very similar message. And the message is, and I think Rob would agree with this, that Americans are going to be saving more, Americans are going to be spending less, and we're going to have to look to global demand, we're going to have to look to global consumption and a global economic recovery. It is not going to be the American consumer, which has been about 70% of GDP. We're not going to go to 75%. 70 is about as high as it goes. And in fact, I believe, and I'm curious what Rob thinks, if as Americans start saving, it may not even feel like we've come out of the recession, because if domestic spending is down because people are spending, there'll still be a little less consumer activity. So the takeaway from this, I believe, is that the key to our economic future, the key to us building a thriving economy, is frankly right here in our backyard. It's right here, and looking at local leaders, looking in their backyard, looking at local companies that can begin to export and export at a higher level. The most durable and sustainable jobs we can create in this country will be export-driven. Partly I believe this because the products that the world is looking to buy are the things that we are making. We're just not exporting them enough. In doubling exports in the next 5 years and creating 2 million jobs, I just want you to, it sounds ambitious, and it is ambitious, and Greg is here from Boeing, and Boeing is helping us do a great job with that, and one of the clients that we work with heavily. But think about this, 95% of the world's consumers live outside the United States. 95%. And yet only 1% of American businesses actually sell to them. So we've got 99% of the companies in this country don't sell a product outside of our borders. We are the largest manufacturer in the world, and yet we rank 3rd in the export of goods. We're behind China and we're behind Germany, yet we manufacture more than Germany and China. And particularly if you look at services, which is an area that we lead, we are still a global leader. But most people look at the export of goods, and in that case, we are behind China, which recently moved into first place and surpassed Germany. So, but one reason I'm particularly bullish, and I worry about exports. I don't worry about the trade deficit, because that thankfully is someone else's job. My job is to worry about exports. And exports for the first 4 months of this year are growing at better than 16.7%. And why that's significant, if we do that for the balance of the 4 years, we will have doubled exports. So right now, we are tracking to double exports in 5 years. So this, people say, well, it's a nice goal, it's interesting theoretically, but actually today, it's only 4 months, but it's 4 months in the right direction, we are doubling exports. And consider this, that only slightly more than 10% of our economy, 10% of our GDP, about 10.5% now, it was a little higher a few years ago, it was about 13%, is generated from exporting goods and services. In Germany, it's 47%. 47%. It's at a much, much higher level. Now, China's had a very strong export market. In February, March was up about 46% of the prior year. The month that just ended from May a year ago, they're up 50% from a year ago. So China is moving very rapidly in its export strategy. But what we have to do is really seize these opportunities that are around the world, because if we don't, the competition will. I mean, I am leaving tomorrow for Vietnam and Indonesia. I'm just back from China and India, mostly on Boeing planes, thankfully. The world, the amount of consumer demand, the amount of demand out there is extraordinary. When I interviewed Jeff Immelt at our annual conference in March, and he left me with many good things, but one thing he said is, between now and 2020, there are going to be 1 billion more people in the middle class globally. 1 billion people. That's a billion people flying on airplanes. That's a billion people taking trains. It's a billion people eating more protein. That's a billion people who need electricity and power. And it's a lot more people who are going to want access to better medical care. When I was in India, if we look at our economy, about 17% of GDP is healthcare. In India, it's 1%. It's 1%. In China, it's also a very small percentage. So the opportunities for power, the opportunities to build plants, roads, airports, India is improving its agricultural output by staggering amounts. The opportunities in medical and technology are enormous for American companies. So the issue is, and our companies are producing the goods that the world wants to buy, that certainly the goods that India, when I was there, wanted to buy. I think the real problem is we're just not selling enough. So many of us focus on imports, and for the gentlemen who still wear ties, if you look at the back of your tie, most of the ties are still made in Italy, or at least they say made in Italy. They're not made in the United States. The point is yours made in Italy? Paris, all right, close enough. The point is we're just not exporting enough. So the National Export Initiative that the President has pulled together.
Made in USA.
Made in USA,
Made
all
in
right.
USA.
We have one. I feel like an auctioneer. We have one in the first row.
Good patriot.
Is to increase exports and have this be a much more focused and a White House-driven initiative on exports. And basically, it includes three, it will be released in the fall, but it includes three basic things. So let me just try and mention those. One, advice. How to find customers, where are those customers located, how to connect with them. When I'm in China, when I'm in India, the commercial service actually helps American companies identify clients, identify customers, and helps them meet them. Two, advocacy, that when there are trade regulations and trade agreements, we enforce them. We make sure we enforce them. And third, where we come in, is financing them. Our goal is to finance exports and to make sure that financing is never a roadblock or an impediment towards making a sale. And we're doing that around the country. Let me give you a couple of examples. In Norcross, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta, there's a company called Suniva. And we actually gave them the Renewable Export of the Year. This is a company that's making some of the most leading technology in photovoltaic cells. They hired a number of employees who were laid off from the auto workers, the auto manufacturers in the Georgia area. They, in fact, were so happy with that, they're actually building a new plant in Michigan to tap into that same labor pool. And 90% of their sales are export sales. We met a company in Miami, small business. He spoke at one of our Export Live events. I was so impressed with him. I asked him if he'd go on our advisory committee. He's actually on our advisory committee. The company's called Dematech, standing for Dental and Medical Technology. He was an advertising guy, and he had sold a number of advertising to this company, and the company couldn't pay its bills. So he, obviously a smart man, in exchange for all the receivables, he got the company. It's a good deal. But it was not making any money. It was losing money, in fact. Last year, we did $4 million. This year, he had his first $1 million month ever in the history of his company. And 90% of his sales are export sales. 90% of what he sells outside the United States. And I'll give you the last one. I was out in Centennial, Colorado, just outside of Denver, and there's a company called Stolly. And Stolly is a company that makes the equipment that makes aluminum cans that you'd see for Diet Coke or beer or soft drinks. And they compete with a British company. Those are the two major competitors in the world. And we just helped finance a transaction to Saudi Arabia. And it's one of the largest orders, about a $34 million order. The president told me it's going to keep 75 people working this year because of that order. It's about 20% of their sales. So my vision, my sense of where we're going to take Ex-Im Bank, what we're here to do is to find more companies like Suniva, like Dematech, like Stolly, and to expand those number of exporters, expand the number of companies that are exporting, expand the number of countries they export to, and help them find more customers. And in the process, so it's more companies, to more countries, to more customers, and in the old-fashioned way, it equals more jobs here at home. Because what clearly has to happen is we've got to make sure that American companies can compete and compete fairly. And that is a very difficult thing in today's world. So we are trying to, at the bank, we like to call us, I learned this, we call ourselves the bank. Nelson worked on the actual transition plan for the Ex-Im Bank, so it's called the bank. We'll let the World Bank find out whatever they want to call themselves, but we call ourselves the bank. We are trying to find more banks. We deal with about 50 banks right now. I don't know what the right number is, but I know 50 is the wrong number. We're trying to find more brokers, more partners, more city-state partners, more chamber of commerce, because, like the story I told you at the beginning of the Rapid Stand, the reason that happens is because people there don't realize what the Export-Import Bank and Ex-Im is. Some of them probably still think we're a radio station, but we're looking to disabuse them of that. The other thing we're doing is we're going to countries. We're looking at countries that have unique opportunities. They're countries that have really strong growth in GDP. They're very fertile. 2, that have an appetite generally at infrastructure, the things we're selling, be it transportation, be it railroads, and so forth. And 3, where our financing can make a difference. So these in Latin America, they're countries like Mexico, Colombia, Brazil. In sub-Saharan Africa, we're looking at countries like South Africa and Nigeria in particular. Half of all exports go to those 2 countries in Africa. We're looking at Turkey. I just visited India, and the other 2 we're exploring intensely is Vietnam and Indonesia, 2 very fastly growing economies. China's not on the list. Let me tell you why China's not on the list. It's not that I don't think China's important. It's, for the Export-Import Bank, our role in helping exports to China is rather small. Our financing is not going to make the difference in China. It can and does make the difference in those countries. And I think one of those 9, if I was to guess, at the end of 2020, I suspect one of those 9 will be the next Brazil. And the fact is, we don't know which it is. But I want to make sure that American companies are there, and they're early, and they're building it. So as that economy takes off, we're a part of that growth and a part of that trajectory. We also see a number of product areas, industrial areas that are really very strong for American companies, that are uniquely American-made, have high U.S. content, have technological advantages, and can compete globally. And they're in the areas of agriculture equipment, construction equipment, power generation, conventional and renewable, the whole avionics, transportation, not just jet aircraft, but the full range of that, and medical equipment and technology. So I'm, as you can tell, pretty bullish on exports. I think I'm bullish because we've been doing it, the first 4 months of this year have been very strong. I'm bullish because the companies and the things that we make in this country are the things the world wants to buy. And one of the things that the companies I mentioned, be that Suniva, be that Dematec, be that Stali, what they had in common in getting them on an international stage and building sales at a large level is financing. And it transformed those companies, particularly a company like Suniva. When you're doing 90% of your sales are exports, that's the dominant play in your business. And I would just say it actually reminds me, I've thought a little about it, every time I meet those companies. In fact, when I was at Dematec, I got to know Luis and his wife. His daughter's an intern. I mean, the whole family's been around. His son, he sometimes has pulled his hair out about his son because he wants his son to work hard. It reminded me a little bit of my own family business. I usually say this for the women in the audience because the men don't remember. But so as Rob said, my family's business was Lillian Vernon, catalog company. I started there, and my mother started in 1951. Was born a year later, so I'm 58. I can just do the math for you. I don't have, I know if I was here figures, how many years ago is he 58 or 48 or 68? And I ran that company, and we ran through recessions, we ran through technological changes, we ran through a lot. You know what? It's hard to run a business. It's hard to run a really small business like Dematec, and it's not much easier to run a larger one. And I remember, I do remember when I was a little kid, we didn't have an Andy machine, so I actually went down to the bank with my mother, and I would actually sit in the leather chair of the bank manager bank's been bought and sold a bunch of times, and I actually would add up the checks. And I would, I'd add them up, help do the deposit, and I'd roll the pennies, the nickels, and the dimes, and help my mom make a deposit. And one thing I remember thinking about is, and then when we became a public company, I'd have to also watch the quarters, because I have to watch the first quarter, second quarter, the third quarter, and I believe the all-important fourth quarter, because that's the single most important quarter. So I just want to say to, particularly to the business people in this audience, I come out of the business world. I ran a company. When I was at the SBA, I would tell people I was not a banker, not a lawyer, and that worked. I tried that in this job, and someone said, but you are a banker. But I came to this as a businessman, so I just want to let those, before we start questions, I bring a business perspective. I use that voice within this administration, and our job is to make this a better environment for the business community to compete globally, and then, frankly, to get out of the way. I think that President Obama believes in that, and I'm an advocate for that. And I thank you for your attention today, and I'll open up for questions.
I'm going to use, yes, still on. I'm going to use moderator's prerogative and ask the first question. As the U.S. economy continues to evolve towards kind of an economic base of highly sophisticated services, what role, and services are playing an increasing role in U.S. exports, how should XM approach the assistance of service exports?
We do a lot in service exports, but frequently the service exports we do are part of a larger project. They may be part of an engineering project. Firms like, frequently they're large firms like a Bechtel or a Fluor or people like that who are doing very large-scale projects, and services are an important part of it. But we also could, if there's a construction project, and whether it be architectural services, engineering services, other technical services that either can be rolled into a larger project and therefore capitalized, or purely from a receivable point of view, just if you have a consulting firm and you're selling abroad, you would like to have an assurance of payment, or B, what you can do or we can provide is dating. There's a company, it's not exactly a service company, but it applies. This company is selling commodities to the Dominican Republic. This woman is able to offer 120-day terms to her customer. She pays a slight premium, and she gets her money in 10 days. So by offering that kind of terms has made her company far more competitive than otherwise, and we can actually just fill that gap.
Great. Why don't we open it now to questions?
Hi, I'm Dana Marshall, and Fred, thank you very much for that really positive and refreshing talk, and thank you for being a business person in this administration that frankly does not have a lot of business people in it at senior levels. It's important to have them in, so it's good to have your voice there. After having said that your speech was refreshing and positive, let me ask you a little bit of perhaps a bit on the dark side kind of question. The export credit function of the government is a very old line function. So the kinds of distortions that other export credit agencies around the world have tried is also something that has been monitored and policed for a long time. What I wanted to ask you is that as you are trying to promote American exports in all the ways that you're doing it with all this action and creativity, when you're dealing with other countries' ECAs, what are you finding the problems are right now? Is there a adherence to the OECD's guidelines? Are other ECAs, and let's put on the table China, for example, are they playing by these rules, or is this yet another area where arguably they are putting a thumb on the scale somewhere to our detriment?
It's a great question. I think we love acronyms in Washington. So the OECD is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The OECD has something called the arrangement, which exists between the 30 countries that says that the financing terms that we offer have to be the same as those of other export credit agencies. So in that large context, that's not as big a problem. The really huge problems is China. The large problems is Brazil and countries like that are not a part of the OECD. We would like them to join. I think that's going to take some time. If you're an optimist, or I'll leave it to you to decide where you stand on that spectrum. But China is much more difficult because they're not bound by any rules. They can provide any financing. They're not accountable. They're not transparent. And that makes competing with Chinese companies and sometimes Brazilian companies. I pick on those two, not pick on it, because they both have large industrial bases. A lot of other developing countries don't have as sophisticated industrial base. So those are particularly difficult. And then on top of that, and it's not just limited to those countries, one of our board members was offered to open a factory in Saudi Arabia, which will build him a factory, put it turnkey, and give it to him for 20 years at like 50 cents a square foot, and provide 20-year financing at 1% if he would locate his company there. So that's before you even get to exporting. That's so under the table you don't even see that. That's a real problem for us. I think that I'm proud to be an advocate for our exporters because it's very hard. Our exporters in this country are doing conventional financing, and it's much more transparent. And when they're dealing with a lot of these other countries, it's not. It's hard to find the most egregious things. They're often they're just not in the bright light of day. So it's a real problem for us. And there's no perfect solution for it. The only solution I know, and the people from different companies here, is selling harder and competing. And frequently, when we make transaction decisions, they're not only on the price. We look at quality, we look at service, we look at reliability. I was with some folks from Caterpillar. I promise you, Caterpillar is not the cheapest equipment, but they have the kind of ironclad service and backup, and once the check is written, they don't disappear. That's currently not the case with some of our competitors. You have to have a question.
If you could identify yourself.
Greg Dole with the Boeing Company. As the chairman said, he was flying a great deal this last couple of weeks on Boeing aircraft. I want to let everyone know here that flies on our aircraft, I suspect the same can be said for Airbus, our competitor. You're flying on an airplane with 4 million parts flying in close formation. Boeing is not a monolithic company. We have to buy those components and parts from suppliers in every state of the United States. We have 22,000 suppliers. We have 160,000 Boeing employees. But the point I want to make, and I know Fred has made this around the country and continues to do so on a regular basis, when he's providing financing support for the delivery of a 747 or a 777 aircraft, he is directly benefiting those 22,000 employees who are in every state and virtually every congressional district in this country. So when you read about Boeing being the largest user of the bank, understand that indeed we are supporting those 22,000 plus suppliers. Last year we doubled the use of the bank because of the global economic crisis in terms of financing of Boeing deliveries. And again, the bottom line is it's paying these 22,000 people. They are sustaining their work. They're maintaining their jobs. They're not out on the street with the 8 or 16 million, however you want to calculate the unemployment number, but indeed are being benefited by Fred and his team. Thanks.
Here's a question back.
My name is Pravin, and I work for a company that's manufacturing data and voice communication systems. And we are right now in the process of bidding a big job in India. For the prime, it's about 800 million, and for us, it'll be about between 10 and 30 million dollars. I understand that the export-import can finance that, but if the end customer over there is, even though it's a communication company, but the end customer happens to be either an Army or a Navy or in, the defense over there, would the export-import bank would finance that kind of a transaction?
We are prohibited by law for financing products that are used by the military. They can be financed through the Department of Defense, but we have a prohibition against that. The French Export Credit Agency and the British can do both civilian and defense and military goods. We cannot. So we could help you find the right person at the Department of Defense. Right. Exactly. I'll turn a question with Greg said. Oh.
Workers who are building parts for Honda in China indeed have gone on strike. They're looking for greater wages, better wages, higher wages. The government has permitted this. The Chinese government has permitted this. I'm wondering if this is part of their calculus to increase domestic consumption, to permit for more wages to be earned by workers, and ultimately to accede to Tim Geithner's strategy to increase consumption. Any thoughts?
I think that China is
in the back of someone's mind.
Yeah, I know. I'm not so good at this conspiracy kind of stuff like that. My sense is that China is in a formidable power and a strong power and a somewhat anxious and a very anxious power because they've got a number. There are rising wage rates. They're a generation or two away from the people who started the revolution, so that the sense and the younger generation is more exposed to the internet, is more exposed to Western thought, is more exposed to Western consumerism, and it's changing. And so my sense is that this is much more defensive, and they're much more anxious about it. And the fact is they're having trouble keeping, when you grow 10, 8, 9, 10% a year compounded year after year after year, conventionally you'd have an overheated economy. So in some ways these things, some of these things may take care of themselves with China. Certainly I think in the medium and long term.
You say China actually experiences more than 100,000 demonstrations a year of more than 100 people. And the primary subjects of these demonstrations are withholding health care from people who need it, because China has a pay-or-die system of health care. 20% have coverage, and if you cannot pay, on the spot you're not treated. That is the Chinese policy since they deconstructed universal health care as they were deconstructing the communes and the state-owned enterprises. The other major subject of these demonstrations is wages. And China tolerates these demonstrations so long as they don't have a political character. Wages are rising in China, characteristic of a fast-growing economy, and they're trying to transition to a higher level of development. But prices have been rising faster, and that's why you see demonstrations at places like Honda.
Hi, Max Salas, Cornet Technology. I have two parts of a question. One is that currently there's for small business, SBA is doing a $2 million line of credit for exporting, and it's going to be raised to $5 million, I understand. Can you comment on that, and where is that going? Then the second part is, I heard you talk about development, helping businesses develop business. I understand how the financing works, but how are you doing the second part? Do you have a plan for that?
The SBA currently, and I was at the SBA, has a cap of $2 million in loans. There's a proposal in Congress to raise it to $5 million. It's still in some process and kicking around Congress to be before it goes to $5 million, which would be very good. I mean, is it going to happen? You know, I worry. I keep my focus on Export-Import Bank and how we're doing in Congress. I haven't focused as much on. I don't know precisely. I would think more likely than not. But that's 10-year-old data when I was at the SBA. I would think that in this environment that would more likely. I would say the way that the Export-Import Bank, we deal with transaction by transaction. So you have a company you want to sell overseas, we can help provide credit insurance or finance your buyer. What it has done for some startup companies or some new companies, even not even maybe beyond startup, like a Soneva, if you think about, or Dematec, if they sell locally, if this dental medical technology company sells locally, he has to give the hospital 90, 60, 90, 120, and in this environment, maybe 150-day terms, and always worrying about, you know, he happened to be in Miami, he called me about it, Jackson Memorial, was talking about going into bankruptcy, do I get paid, is there a workout, what happens? He sells to a foreign buyer, he can get paid in 10 days. And he has a totally guaranteed receivable. So we are sometimes seeing that some startup companies or new companies are seeing that export can be a real path to growth and to dollar sales because the receivables are guaranteed and it can be a much more secure way of doing business. Nelson?
Hi, Nelson Cunningham at McClarty Associates. First of all, Fred, for those of us who saw what the state of the economy was and what the state of Exim was back during the transition from the former administration to the current one, we're just so proud of the role that Exim is playing in helping to drive this export initiative and to help drive that piece of the American recovery. It really has been marvelous to watch. I happened to be in India by coincidence. I was in India the week before you were there. And
did you turn up the heat?
Yeah. It was about 113 when I was
yes,
there.
Yes, it was 113 in Delhi. It was. I haven't walked through that kind of heat.
You showed dedication by going to India in May. Al Kamen could not make fun of you for traveling to Delhi at that time of the year. But there are a lot of political murmurings in Delhi and concerns about the relationship with the U.S. And these relate to Pakistan, to Afghanistan, to counterterrorism. The one place where there's unbridled optimism is on the economic and commercial relationship. And I'm wondering, what was your visit like when you were in India, and what are the sectors where you find the Indians most receptive to the type of help that you can give and to the sort of American products that you can help finance?
I would say India, I will contrast a little bit with China because I did both on the same trip. And the only way to fly, believe it or not, between Beijing and New Delhi is on Ethiopian Airways. That would be like flying from here to Mexico City on like Lithuanian Airways. I mean, I don't understand how. And although Gregor was a Boeing plane, but I needed a screwdriver because my seat perpetually rocked. You know, it was not locked in place for takeoff and landing. The tray table was, but not the seat. India really likes doing business with America. Indians, you know, when they can, they send their children to American schools. They really have a great sort of natural affinity to the United States. I would say that virtually every conversation in India is about power. They are building, and they're building power, be it they're building coal plants, they're building renewable plants, hydro. They're looking to build nuclear in the next 2-3 years. They're not doing a lot of gas because they use the gas more for fertilizer. But every other conversation, I mean, there were we met with like the power minister, the environmental minister. I mean, there were like 4 ministers only dealing with power. And after all, it was hard to discern which did which. But my point was that power is overwhelming. There are a lot of opportunities in the renewable space. We met with a number of people in renewable energy, more solar than wind. I think that's just the nature of the marketplace there. And they're doing a lot in conventional as well. But I would say power, followed probably by road construction, because they are doing concessions. So if there's a road, if you've been to India, you know, if you want to go to the Taj Mahal in Agra, it's currently a 4-hour trip. They're letting out a contract. It'll be a 90-minute trip where the concessionaire gets the road concession for something like 25 years, gets the revenue from the road. the auxiliary revenue from services around the road, and then 25 years later hands it back to the government. So I would say certainly in the construction area and in the power and transportation, but transportation it's going through a little bit of indigestion with as the Indian commercial airline market sorts itself out between Jet Airways and Indian Airways and Kingfisher and the whole like of them. Yes.
Show Chandra with Bloomberg. You talked about how the U.S. is making enough products that the rest of the world wants, but we're not selling enough. What do you explain? How do you explain, where this is coming from? And have you seen a change in the mindset of companies here since this export initiative was announced? Are you seeing more people coming and asking how they can export, or is it still more driven by the government trying to get the word out and get people energized?
To your first question, I was in Brazil, and I don't know if you saw this, Nelson. One of the interesting thing is, one of the frustrations in Brazil is Brazilian companies also don't like to export. They go, there are 200 million people here, it's a big economy, we speak Portuguese, why do I need to export to Colombia and Mexico? I got to learn another language, I got to deal with tariffs, I got to get on an airplane, sorry. I think that part of it is you have these large economies with a lot of growth, as we've had here for many years, and it was like, why do I need to do this? When I ran my catalog company, we looked at exporting to Latin America, to Canada, and we said, guys, we've got to pay duty and tariffs, we've got to get the products back and provide service. So I think there's that's not unusual when you have such a robust growth. One, we're not going to see that kind of growth here, so I think more companies have to look overseas. I was in the State of the Union. I thought it was a very good speech. When he said he wanted to double exports in 5 years, I thought it was a great speech. It's made our job easier because wherever we go, people are talking about exports. Senator Tester had me out to Billings, Montana last Thursday to do an export event to try and promote exports in Montana. We had 125 people there. I was surprised. It was a lot of people. And currently, Montana ranks number 48. They've actually 52 because you throw in the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, but Montana sits there right with Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. I'm not exactly sure what we export from here, but we're kissing cousins with Montana. So, but there was an interest there. I was in Denver the next day, and there is more and more interest, I think, and I think the president providing leadership. We now have mayors and governors and county executives and members of Congress really thinking about this is where the job's going to come from. Yes, the fact that, the reason I say that I would not have guessed we'd have 125 people showing up in Billings, Montana, at Rocky Mountain Community College, to spend 6 hours learning how to do exporting. So I think that there is more and more, and they're seeing companies like Suniva, who I mentioned, like Dematec, that's the way they're sustaining sales. I'll give you one other example. I have a lot of favorite companies. This one is in Olney, Texas, a town of 3,500 people and one Dairy Queen. And it's a company called Air Tractor, and they make crop dusters. And 1995, we started with them, 10% of their sales were exports. This year, for the first time, more than half their sales will be exports. And they got it. It took them time, but they sell to Brazil, they sell to Argentina. Those are the two big markets this year. They sell to China, they sell to India. And more than half their employees are there purely because. So, one, those stories get out, but there are companies like that more and more that are sort of realizing that's going to be the path to both sales, profits, and ultimately jobs.
We have time for one more question, I think.
Maybe we'll get two. Pat Sarcone.
Okay, we'll have two.
Well, Fred, of late there's a lot of conversation about outsourcing and a lot of bashing of companies for outsourcing. And that's particularly disturbing to a lot of us because we believe that we're the innovators and what we do abroad makes for jobs in this country. And for us, it's, our markets are 70% overseas, but our highest paying jobs, 60% of them are here. So how would you...
And R would be?
Pardon me?
Your
HP.
Okay, just for...
And how would you suggest that we mitigate this, and is there another way we could talk about it? In addition, the corporate tax rate is the highest in the world, and that disadvantages us with foreign companies. So we really need some help on that, and I know that's not particularly your bailiwick, but you have a close relationship with the administration. Maybe you can help us.
You know, I think that I'm hopeful the National Export Initiative, you know, we can have a better conversation about trade and about export and our role in the global economy as a result of it. Because issues about taxes come up when I meet with audiences, issues around immigration comes up. All of these ultimately get linked to our own economic well-being and how we can do exporting, and therefore create a stronger economy here. But we still a long way in terms of a conversation to get that to happen here. You know, I was on ABC Top Line, and the first question was, well, you're about trade. Isn't that about losing jobs? And I go, how did the word trade and losing jobs become linked in the same sentence? But somehow we did, and we've got it. I was with Dan Maffei, the congressman in upstate New York, and he says, my constituents hate trade, they hate NAFTA, they love selling to Canada. And he said, I don't understand. We sell all this stuff to Canada, it gives everybody a great job, but they hate trade, they hate NAFTA. That was a question there.
Hey, I'm Thad Inge. I work for SBA's Office of Advocacy. One of the things our office does is try to reduce the regulatory burden on small businesses. And since this has come out, the National Export Initiative or Plan, we've gotten calls from small businesses that are very interested, but have talked about some of the challenges they face with regulations, the length of time for certain, say, high-tech companies to get approved to sell abroad from defense and commerce, and also just generally the paperwork and sort of regulatory burden for really small businesses that don't have a lot of staff. And I think I heard that part of Obama's plan was to try to simplify some of that. But I just wanted to know if you had any comments or thoughts.
I mean, it is a comprehensive plan. Secretary Locke is taking the lead on that, particularly when it comes to things like export controls and so forth. And I think that the idea of the National Export Initiative is to try and simplify it and to try and make this a little bit more seamless. You know, although I was in India with four different ministers involved with the power and the energy sector, but you know, people frankly say, "Oh my God, you believe how bureaucratic it is?" And, you know, guys, we're not. You know, we have the Department of Energy, we have EPA, we have Council of Economic Quality. We aren't much better. I think that there is an effort. You work at the SBA. You know, frankly, getting agencies to work together is a challenge. Just like when two companies want to do a joint venture, it's not that easy to sort out the issues of control and issues of protocols and so forth. So it is a part of it. But one of the reasons it hasn't probably gone further to date is because it's hard to do. It's hard to do. I'm going to turn it back over to our host.
Right. I want to thank Fred Hochberg for coming. Fascinating talk and a really good discussion. These are issues that NDN will come back to regularly in our work, and I look forward to collaborating with you, Fred, on this work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.